ashes, fumbling for signs that someone got away, while the dogman pulled at his shoulder and told him to give it up. Nothing but corpses, rotted past knowing. He was done looking for signs. They were all dead as the Shanker could make them, and that was dead for sure. He spat in the snow, brown spit from the dry meat, dead and cold and rotted, or burned to ashes, gone back to the mud. Logan set his jaw and clenched his fists under the rotten shreds of blanket. He could go back to the ruins of the village by the sea just one last time. He could charge down with a fighting roar in his throat, the way he had done at Carleon when he'd lost a finger and won a reputation. He could put a few Shanker out of the world, split them like he'd split Sharma Heartless, shoulder to guts so his insides fell out. He could get vengeance for his father, his wife, his children, his friends. That would be a fitting end for the one they called the Bloody Nine, to die killing. That might be a song worth the singing. But at Carleon he'd been young and strong, and with his friends behind him. Now he was weak and hungry and alone as could be. He'd killed Sharma Heartless with a long sword, sharp as anything. He looked down at his knife. It might be a good one, but he'd get precious little vengeance with it. And who'd sing the song anyway? The Shanker had poor singing voices and worse imaginations, if they even recognized the stinking beggar in the blanket after they'd shot him full of arrows. Perhaps the vengeance could wait, at least until he had a bigger blade to work with. You have to be realistic after all. South then, and become a wanderer. There was always work for a man with his skills. Hard work perhaps, and dark, but work all the same. There was an appeal in it, he had to admit, to have no one depending on him but himself, for his decisions to hold no importance, for no one's life or death to be in his hands. He had enemies in the south, that was a fact, but the Bloody Nine had dealt with enemies before. He spat again. Now that he had some spit, he thought he might make the most of it. It was about all he did have: spit, an old pot, and some stinking bits of blanket. Dead in the north or alive in the south. That was what it came down to, and that was no choice at all. You carry on. That's what he'd always done. That's the task that comes with surviving, whether you deserve to live or not. You remember the dead as best you can. You say some words for them. Then you carry on, and you hope for better. Logan took in a long, cold breath and blew it out. "Fare you well, my friends," he muttered. "Fare you well." Then he threw his pack over his shoulder, turned, and began to flounder through the deep snow. Downwards, southwards, out of the mountains. It was raining still. A soft rain that coated everything in cold dew, collected on the branches, on the leaves, on the needles, and dripped off in great fat drops that soaked through Logan's wet clothes and onto his wet skin. He squatted still and silent in the damp brush, water running down his face, the bright blade of his knife glistening with wet. He felt the great motion of the forest and heard all its thousand sounds. Countless calling of the insects, the blind scuttling of the moles, the timid rustling of the deer, the slow pulsing of the sap in the old tree trunks. Each thing alive in the forest was in search of its own kind of food. He let his mind settle on an animal close to him, moving cautiously through the woods to his right. Delicious. The forest grew silent, but for the endless dripping of water from the branches. The world shrank down to Logan and his next meal. When he reckoned it was close enough, he sprang forward and bore it down onto the wet ground. A young deer. It kicked and struggled, but he was strong and quick. He stabbed his knife into its neck and chopped the throat out. Hot blood surged from the wound, spilled out across Logan's hands onto the wet earth. He picked up the carcass and slung it over his shoulders. That would be good in a stew, maybe with some mushrooms. Very good. Then, once he'd eaten, he would ask the spirits for guidance. Their guidance was pretty useless, but the company would be welcome. When he reached his camp, it was close to sunset. It was a dwelling fit for a hero of Logan's stature. 2 big sticks holding a load of damp branches and a hollow window. Still, it was halfway dry in there, and the rain had stopped. He would have a fire tonight. A long time since he had a treat like that. A fire, and all his own. Later, well fed and rested, Logan pressed a lump of chaga into his pipe. He'd found it growing a few days before at the base of a tree, big, moist, yellow discs of it. He'd broken off a good chunk for himself, but it hadn't dried out enough to smoke until today. Now he took a burning twig from the fire and stuck it in the bowl, puffing away hard until the fungus caught and began to burn, giving off its familiar earthy sweet smell. Logan coughed, blew out brown smoke, and stared into the shifting flames. His mind went back to other times, other campfires. The dogman was there, grinning, the light gleaming on his pointy teeth. Talduru was sitting opposite, big as a mountain, laughing like thunder. Forley the weakest, too, with those nervous eyes darting around, always a little scared. Rudd Three Trees was there, and Harding Grim, saying nothing. He never did say anything. That was why they called him Grim. They were all there. Only they were all dead, gone back to the mud. Logan tapped the pipe out into the fire and shoved it away. He had no taste for it now. His father had been right. He should never smoke alone. He unscrewed the cap of the battered flask, took a mouthful, and blew it out in a spray of tiny drops. A gout of flame went up into the cold air. Logan wiped his lips, savoring the hot, bitter taste. Then he sat back against the knotted trunk of a pine and waited. It was a while before they came. 3 of them. They came silently from the dancing shadows among the trees and made slowly for the fire, taking shape as they moved into the light. 9 fingers, said the first. 9 fingers, the second. 9 fingers, the third. Voices like the 1,000 sounds of the forest. You're right welcome to my fire, said Logan. The spirit squatted and stared at him without expression. Only 3 tonight. The one on the right spoke first. Every year, fewer of us wake from the winter. We're all that remain. A few more winters will pass, and we will sleep also. There will be none of us left to answer your call. Logan nodded sadly. Any news from the world? We heard a man fell off a cliff, but washed up alive, then crossed the high places at the start of spring, wrapped in a rotten blanket. But we put no faith in such rumors. Very wise. Bethord has been making war, said the spirit in the center. Logan frowned. Bethord is always making war. That's what he does. Yes, he has won so many fights now with your help. He has given himself a golden hat. Shit on that bastard, said Logan, spitting into the fire. What else? North of the mountains, the Shankar run around and burn things. They love the fire, said the spirit in the center. They do, said the one on the left. Even more than your kind, 9 fingers. They love and feel it. The spirit leaned forwards. We heard there is a man seeking to ruin the wars to the south. A powerful man, said the one in the center. A magus of the old time, the one on the left. Logan frowned. He'd heard of these magi. He met a sorcerer once, but he'd been easy to kill. No unnatural powers in particular, not that Logan had noticed. But a magus was something else. "We heard that the magi are wise and strong," said the spirit in the center, "and that such a one could take a man far and show him many things. But they are crafty too, and have their own purposes." "What does he want?" "Ask him." Spirits cared little for the business of men. They were always weak on the details. Still, this was better than the usual talk about trees. "What will you do, Nine Fingers?" Logan considered a moment. "I will go south and find this magus, and ask him what he wants from me." The spirits nodded. They didn't show whether they thought it was a good idea or bad. They didn't care. "Farewell then, Nine Fingers," said the spirit on the right. "Perhaps for the last time." "I'll try to struggle on without you." Logan's wit was wasted on them. They rose and moved away from the fire, fading gradually into the darkness. Soon they were gone, but Logan had to admit they had been more use than he cared to show. They had given him a purpose. He would head south in the morning, head south and find this magus. Who knew? He might be a good talker. Had to be better than being shot full of arrows at other campfires when he had not been alone. Chapter 4. Playing with Knives. It was a beautiful spring day in Adua, and the sun shone pleasantly through the branches of the aromatic cedar, casting a dappled shade on the players beneath. A pleasing breeze fluttered through the courtyard, so the cards were clutched tightly or weighted down with glasses or coins. Birds twittered from the trees. The shears of a gardener clacked across from the far side of the lawn, making faint, agreeable echoes against the tall white buildings of the quadrangle. Whether or not the players found the large sum of money in the center of the table pleasant depended, of course, on the cards they held. Captain Giselle Dan Luther certainly liked it. He had discovered an uncanny talent for the game since he gained his commission in the King's Oath, a talent which he had used to win large sums of money from his comrades. He didn't really need the money, of course, coming from such a wealthy family, but it had allowed him to maintain an illusion of thrift while spending like a sailor. Whenever Giselle went home, his father bored everyone on the subject of his good fiscal planning and had rewarded him by buying his captaincy just 6 months ago. His brothers had not been happy. Yes, the money was certainly useful, and there's nothing half so amusing as humiliating one's closest friends. Giselle half sat, half lay back on his bench with one leg stretched out and allowed his eyes to wander over the other players. Major West had rocked his chair so far onto its back legs that he looked in imminent danger of tipping over entirely. He was holding his glass up to the sun, admiring the way that the light filtered through the amber spirit inside. He had a faint, mysterious smile which seemed to say, "I am not a nobleman, and maybe you're socially inferior, but I won a contest and the king's favor on the battlefield. That makes me the better man. So you children damn well do as I say." He was out of this hand, though, and in Giselle's opinion, far too cautious with his money anyway. Lieutenant Casper was sitting forward, frowning and scratching his sandy beard, staring intently at his cards, as though they were sums he didn't understand. He was a good-humoured young man, but an oaf of a card player, and was always most appreciative when Giselle bought him drinks with his own money. Still, he could well afford to lose it. His father was one of the biggest landowners in the Union. Giselle had often observed that the ever so slightly stupid will act more stupidly in clever company. Having lost the high ground already, they scramble eagerly for the position of likable idiot. Stay out of arguments, they will only lose, and can hence be everyone's friend. Casper's look of baffled concentration seemed to say, "I am not clever, but honest and likable. which is much more important. Cleverness is overrated. Oh, and I'm very, very rich, so everyone likes me regardless. I believe I'll stay with you, said Caspar, and tossed a small stack of silver coins onto the table. They broke and flashed in the sun with a cheerful jingle. Giselle absently added up the total in his head. A new uniform, perhaps? Caspar always got a little quivery when he really held good cards, and he was not trembling now. To say that he was bluffing was to give him far too much credit. More likely, he was simply bored with sitting out. Giselle had no doubt that he would fold up like a cheap tent on the next round of betting. Lieutenant Jallenhorn scowled and tossed his cards onto the table. "I've had nothing but shit today," he rumbled. He sat back in his chair and hunched his brawny shoulders with a frown that said, "I am big and manly and have a quick temper, so I should be treated with respect by everyone." Respect was precisely what Giselle never gave him at the card table. A bad temper might be useful in a fight, but it's a liability where money is concerned. It was a shame his hand hadn't been a little better, or Giselle could have bullied him out of half his pay. Jallenhorn drained his glass and reached for the bottle. That just left Brint, the youngest and poorest of the group. He licked his lips with an expression at once careful and slightly desperate, an expression which seemed to say, "I am not young or poor. I can afford to lose this money. I am every bit as important as the rest of you." He had a lot of money today. His allowance had just come in. Perhaps that was all he had to live on for the next couple of months. Giselle planned to take that money away from him and waste it all on women and drink. He had to stop himself giggling at the thought. He could giggle when he'd won the hand. Brint sat back and considered carefully. He might be some time making his decision, so Giselle took his pipe from the table. He lit it at the lamp provided especially for that purpose and blew ragged smoke rings up into the branches of the cedar. He wasn't half as good at smoking as he was at cards, unfortunately, and most of the rings were no more than ugly puffs of yellow-brown vapor. If he was being completely honest, he didn't really enjoy smoking. It made him feel a bit sick. But it was very fashionable and very expensive, and Giselle would be damned if he would miss out on something fashionable just because he didn't like it. Besides, his father had bought him a beautiful ivory pipe the last time he was in the city, and it looked very well on him. His brothers had not been happy about that either, come to think of it. "I'm in," said Brint. Giselle swung his leg off the bench. "Then I raise you 100 marks or so." He shoved his whole stack into the center of the table. West sucked air through his teeth. A coin fell from the top of the pile, landed on its edge, and rolled along the wood. It dropped to the flags beneath with the unmistakable sound of falling money. The head of the gardener on the other side of the lawn snapped up instinctively before he returned to his clipping of the grass. Caspar shoved his cards away as though they were burning his fingers and shook his head. "Damn it, but I'm an oaf of a card player," he lamented, and leaned back against the rough brown trunk of the tree. Giselle stared straight at Lieutenant Brint, a slight smile on his face, giving nothing away. "He's bluffing," mumbled Jallenhorn. "Don't let him push you around, Brint." "Don't do it, Lieutenant," said West. But Giselle knew he would. He had to look as if he could afford to lose. Brint didn't hesitate. He put all his own coins in with a careless flourish. "That's 100, give or take." Brint was trying his hardest to sound masterful in front of the older officers, but his voice had a charming note of hysteria. "Good enough," said Giselle. "We're all friends here. What do you have, Lieutenant?" "I have earth." Brint's eyes had a slightly feverish look to them as he showed his cards to the group. Giselle savored the tense atmosphere. He frowned, shrugged, raised his eyebrows. He scratched his head thoughtfully. He watched Brint's expression change as he changed his own. Hope, despair, hope, despair. At length, Giselle spread his cards out on the table. "Oh, look, I have sons again." Brint's face was a picture. West gave a sigh and shook his head. Jallenhorn frowned. "I was sure he was bluffing," he said. "How does he do it?" asked Caspar, flicking a stray coin across the table. Giselle shrugged. "It's all about the players, and nothing about the cards." He began to scoop up the heap of silver, while Brint looked on, teeth gritted, face pale. The money jingled into the bag with a pleasant sound. Pleasant to Giselle, anyway. A coin dropped from the table and fell next to Brint. Stood up quickly, knocking into the table and making the coins and glasses jump and rattle. "I've things to do," he said in a thick voice, then shouldered roughly past Giselle, barging him against the trunk of the tree, and strode off toward the edge of the courtyard. He disappeared into the officers' quarters, head down. "Did you see that?" Giselle was becoming ever more indignant with each passing moment. "Barging me like that, it's damn impolite. And me, his superior officer as well. I've a good mind to put him on report." A chorus of disapproving sounds greeted this mention of reports. "Well, he's a bad loser. He isn't rich. He can't afford to lose." "Well, if he can't afford to lose, he shouldn't play," snapped Giselle, upset. "Who's the one told him I was bluffing? You should keep your big mouth shut." "He's new here," said West. "He just wants to fit in. Weren't you new once?" "What are you, my father?" Giselle remembered being new with painful clarity. The mention of it made him feel just a little ashamed. Caspar waved his hand. "I'll lend him some money, don't worry." "He won't take it," said Jallenhorn. "Well, that's his business." Caspar closed his eyes and turned his face up to the sun. "Hot. Winter is truly over. Must be getting past midday." "Shit!" shouted Giselle, starting up and gathering his things. The gardener paused in his trimming of the lawn and looked over at them. "Why didn't you say something, West?" "What am I, your father?" asked the Major. Caspar sniggered. "Late again," said Jallenhorn, blowing out his cheeks. "The Lord Marshal will not be happy." Giselle snatched up his fencing steels and ran for the far side of the lawn. Major West ambled after him. "Come on!" shouted Giselle. "I'm right behind you, Captain," he said. "Right behind you." "Jab! Jab, Giselle! Jab! Jab!" barked Lord Marshal Varus, whacking him on the arm with his stick. "Ow!" yelped Giselle, and hefted the metal bar again. "I want to see that right arm moving, Captain, darting like a snake. I want to be blinded by the speed of those hands." Giselle made a couple more clumsy lunges with the unwieldy lump of iron. It was utter torture. His fingers, his wrist, his forearm, his shoulder were burning with the effort. He was soaked to the skin with sweat. It flew from his face in big drops. Marshal Varus flicked his feeble efforts away. "Now cut! Cut with the left!" Giselle swung the big smith's hammer at the old man's head with all the strength of his left arm. He could barely lift the damn thing on a good day. Marshal Varus stepped effortlessly aside and whacked him in the face with the stick. "Yow!" wailed Giselle as he stumbled back. He fumbled the hammer and it dropped on his foot. "Ah!" The iron bar clanged to the floor as he bent down to grab his screaming toes. He felt a stinging pain as Varus whacked him across the arm, the sharp smack echoing across the courtyard, and he sprawled onto his face. "That's pitiful!" shouted the old man. "You are embarrassing me in front of Major West!" The Major had rocked his chair back and was shaking with muffled laughter. Giselle stared at the Marshal's immaculately polished boots, seeing no pressing need to get up. "Up, Captain Luther!" shouted Varus. "My time, at least, is valuable." All right. Giselle clambered wearily to his feet and stood there, swaying in the hot sun, panting for air. "You been drinking today already?" he demanded, his grey moustaches bristling. "And last night too, no doubt." Giselle had no reply. Well, damn you then. We have work to do, Captain Luthar, and I cannot do it alone. 4 months until the contest. 4 months to make a master swordsman of you. Baruz waited for a reply, but Giselle could not think of one. He was only really doing this to make his father happy, but somehow he didn't think that was what the old soldier wanted to hear, and he could do without being hit again. Bah! Baruz barked in Giselle's face and turned away, stick clenched tight behind him with both hands. Marshal Ver... Giselle began, but before he could finish, the old soldier span around and jabbed him right in the stomach. Said Giselle as he sank to his knees. Baruz stood over him. You are going to go on a little run for me, Captain. You are going to run from here to the Tower of Chains. You are going to run up the tower to the parapet. You will know when you have arrived, as the Major and I will be above the tower. I will be able to see you with my eyeglass, so there will be no cheating this time. And he whacked Giselle on the top of the head. Ow! Said Giselle. Run as fast as you can, and I know this to be true, because if you have not returned by the time we have finished our game, you will go again. Giselle winced. Major West is an excellent hand of squares, so it should take me half an hour to beat him. I suggest you begin at once. Giselle lurched to his feet and jogged toward the archway at the far side of the courtyard, muttering curses. You need to go faster than that, Captain, Baruz called after him. Giselle's legs were blocks of lead, but he urged them on. Knees up, shouted Major West cheerily. Giselle clattered down the passageway, past a smirking porter sitting by the door, and out onto the broad avenue beyond. By the near windowless mass of the House of Questions, its heavy front gates sealed tight. He passed a few colourless clerks hurrying this way and that, but the Agriont was quiet at this time of the afternoon, and Giselle saw nobody of interest until he passed into the park. 3 fashionable young ladies were sitting in the shade of a spreading willow by the lake, accompanied by an elderly chaperone. Giselle upped his pace immediately and replaced his tortured expression with a nonchalant smile, but slowed to half the speed as soon as he was out of sight. Baruz be damned, he said to himself, nearly walking as he turned onto the Kingsway, but had to speed up again straight away. Crown Prince Ladislaw was not 20 strides off, holding forth with his enormous, brightly coloured retinue. Captain Luthar! Shouted His Highness, sunlight flashing off his outrageous golden buttons. Run for all you're worth! I have 1,000 marks on you to win the contest! Giselle had it on good authority that the prince had backed Remadan Gorsk to the tune of 2,000 marks, but he still bowed as low as he possibly could while running. The prince's entourage of dandies cheered, but he would have loved to be one of them. He passed the huge stone effigies of 600 years of high kings on his right, the statues of their loyal retainers, slightly smaller, on his left. He nodded to the great Mager's spires just before he turned into the square of marshals, but the wizard frowned back as disapprovingly as ever, the awe-inspiring effect only slightly diminished by a streak of white pigeon skin on his stony cheek. With the open council in session, the square was almost empty, and Giselle was able to amble over to the gate of the hall's marshal. A thick-set sergeant nodded to him as he passed through, and Giselle wondered whether he might be from his own company. The common soldiers all looked the same, after all. He ignored the man and ran on between the towering white buildings. Perfect, muttered Giselle. Jallenhorm and Casper were sitting by the door to the Tower of Chains, smoking pipes and laughing. The bastards must have guessed that he'd be coming this way. For honor and glory! Bellowed Casper, rattling his sword in its scabbard as Giselle ran by. Don't keep the Lord Marshal waiting! He shouted from behind, and Giselle heard the big man roaring with amusement. Bloody idiots! panted Giselle, shouldering open the heavy door, breath rasping as he started up. Bloody steps, he cursed to himself. By the time he reached the hundreds, his legs were burning and his chest was heaving. By the time he reached the 200s, he was a wreck. He walked the rest of the way, every footfall torture, and eventually burst out through a turret onto the roof and leaned on the parapet, blinking in the sudden brightness. To the south, the city was spread out below him, an endless carpet of white houses stretching all around the glittering bay. In the other direction, the view over the Agriont was even more impressive. A great confusion of magnificent buildings piled one upon the other, broken up by green lawns and great trees, circled by its wide moat and its towering wall, studded with 100 lofty towers. The Kingsway sliced straight through the center toward the Lord's Round, its bronze dome shining in the sunlight. The tall spires of the university stood behind, and casting its long shadow across the buildings below. Giselle fancied that he saw the sun glint on Marshal Varouze's eyeglass in the distance. He cursed once again and made for the stairs. Giselle was immensely relieved when he finally made it to the roof and saw that there were still a few white pieces on the board. Marshal Varouze frowned up at him. "You are very lucky. The Major has put up an exceptionally determined defense." A smile broke West's features. "You must somehow have earned his respect, even if you have yet to win mine." Giselle bent over with his hands on his knees, blowing hard and dripping sweat onto the floor. Varouze took the long case from the table, walked over to Giselle and flipped it open. "Show us your forms." Giselle took the short steel in his left hand and the long in his right. They felt light as feathers after the heavy iron. Marshal Varouze backed away a step. "Begin." He snapped into the first form, right arm extended, left close to the body. The blade swished and weaved through the air, glittering in the afternoon sun, as Giselle moved from one familiar stance to the next with a practiced smoothness. At length he was finished, and he let the steels drop to his sides. Varouze nodded. "The captain has fast hands, has he not?" "Truly excellent," said Major West, smiling broadly. "A damn sight better than ever I was." The Lord Marshal was less impressed. "Your knees are too far bent in the third form, and you must strive for more extension on the left arm in the fourth. But otherwise," he paused, "passable." Giselle breathed a sigh of relief. That was high praise indeed. "Ha!" shouted the old man, striking him in the ribs with the end of the case. Giselle sank to the floor, hardly able to breathe. "Your reflexes need work, though, Captain. You should always be ready. Always. If you have steels in your hands, you damn well keep them up." "Yes, sir," croaked Giselle. "And your stamina is a disgrace. You're blowing like a carp. I have it on good authority that Bremadan Gorst runs 10 miles a day and barely shows a sweat." Marshal Varouze leaned down over him. "From now on, you will do the same. Oh yes, a circuit of the wall of the Agriont every morning at 6, followed by an hour of sparring with Major West, who has been kind enough to agree to act as your partner. I am confident that he will point up all the little weaknesses in your technique." Giselle winced and rubbed his aching ribs. "As for the carousing, I want an end to it. I am all for revelry in its proper place, but there will be time for celebration after the contest, providing you have worked hard enough to win. Until then, clean living is what we need. You understand me, Captain Luthor?" He leaned down further, pronouncing every word with great care. "Clean living, Captain." "Yes, Marshal Varouze." Laughing like a lunatic, he plunged out into the street, head spinning. The cold air slapped him hard in the face. The mean little buildings weaved and swayed. The ill-lit road tipped like a sinking ship. Giselle wrestled manfully with the urge to vomit, shouting washed out at him. A ragged shape flew from the tavern and struck him in the chest. Giselle grappled with it desperately, then fell. He hit the ground with a bone-jarring crash. The world was dark for a moment. Then he found himself squashed into the dirt with Caspar on top of him.
"Damn it!"
he gurgled, tongue thick and clumsy in his mouth. He shoved the giggling lieutenant away with his elbow, rolled over and lurched up, stumbling about as the street seesawed around him. Caspar lay on his back in the dirt, choking with laughter, reeking of cheap booze and sour smoke. Giselle made a lame attempt to brush the dirt from his uniform. There was a big wet patch on his chest that smelled of beer. "Damn it," he mumbled again. When had that happened? He became aware of some shouting on the other side of the road. 2 men grappling in a doorway. Giselle squinted hard, strained against the gloom. A big man had hold of some well-dressed fellow and seemed to be tying his hands behind his back. Now he was forcing some kind of bag over his head. Giselle blinked in disbelief. It was far from a reputable area, but this seemed somewhat strong. The door of the tavern banged open, and West and Jallenhorm came out, deep in drunken conversation, something about someone's sister. Bright, with a mask over the lower part of his face. He had white hair, white eyebrows, skin white as milk. Giselle stared at the white devil across the road, and he glared back with narrowed pink eyes.
"Help!"
It was the fellow with the bag on his head, his voice shrill with fear.
"Help! I am—"
The white man dealt him a savage blow in the midriff, and he folded up with a sigh. "You there!" shouted West. Jallenhorm was already rushing across the street. "What?" said Caspar, propped up on his elbows in the road. Giselle's mind was full of mud, but his feet seemed to be following Jallenhorm, so he stumbled along with them, feeling very sick. West came behind him. The white ghost started up and turned to stand between them and his prisoner. Another man moved briskly out of the shadows, tall and thin, dressed all in black and masked, but with long, greasy hair. He held up a gloved hand. "Gentlemen!" His whining commoner's voice was muffled by his mask. "Gentlemen, please. We're on the king's business. The king conducts his business. That's why he needs us for the nighttime stuff, eh, friend?" "Who is this man?" West was pointing at the fellow with the bag on his head. The prisoner was struggling up again.
"I am Septel... Oof!"
The white monster silenced him with a heavy fist in the face, knocking him limp into the road. Jallenhorm put a hand on the hilt of his sword, jaw clenching, and the white ghost loomed forward with a terrible speed. Close up, he was even more massive, alien, and terrifying. Jallenhorm took an involuntary step back, stumbled on the rutted surface of the road, and pitched onto his back with a crash. Giselle's head was thumping. "Back!" bellowed West. His sword whipped out of its scabbard with a faint ringing. Hissed the monster, fists clenched like 2 big white rocks.
"Ah!"
gurgled the man with the bag on his head. Giselle's heart was in his mouth. He looked at the thin man. The thin man's eyes smiled back. How could anyone smile at a time like this? Giselle was surprised to see that he had a long, ugly knife in his hand. Where did that come from? He fumbled. Giselle paused, uncertain, steel halfway out. Jallenhorm scrambled to his feet, the back of his uniform crusted with mud, pulled out his own sword. The pale monster stared at them unblinking, not retreating a finger's breadth. "Major West!" came the voice again, accompanied now by a clicking, scraping sound. West's face had turned pale. A figure emerged from the shadows, limping badly, cane tapping on the dirt. His broad-brimmed hat obscured the upper part of his face, but his mouth was twisted into a strange smile. Giselle noticed with a sudden wave of nausea that his 4 front teeth were missing. He shuffled towards them, ignoring all the naked steel, and offered his free hand to West. The Major slowly sheathed his sword, took the hand, and shook it limply. Colonel Glockter? He asked in a husky voice. Your humble servant, though I am no longer an army man. I'm with the King's Inquisition now. He reached up slowly and removed his hat. His face was deathly pale, deeply lined, close-cropped hair scattered with grey. His eyes stared out feverish bright from deep, dark rings, the left one noticeably narrower than the right, pink-rimmed and glistening wet. And these are my assistants, Practical Severard, lanky one gave a mockery of a bow, and Frost. The white monster jerked the prisoner to his feet with one hand. Hold on, said Jallenhorn, stepping forward, but the Inquisitor put a gentle hand on his arm. This man is a prisoner of His Majesty's Inquisition, Lieutenant Jallenhorn. The big man paused, surprised to be called by name. I realize your motives are of the best, but he is a criminal, a traitor. I have a warrant for him, signed by Archlector Salt himself. He is most unworthy of your assistance, believe me. Jallenhorn frowned and stared balefully at Practical Frost. The pale devil looked terrified, about as terrified as a stone. He hauled the prisoner over his shoulder without apparent effort and turned up the street. The one called Severard smiled with his eyes, sheathed his knife, bowed again, and followed his companion, whistling tunelessly as he sauntered off. The Inquisitor's left eyelid began to flutter, and tears rolled down his pale cheek. He wiped it carefully on the back of his hand. Please forgive me. Honestly, it's coming to something when a man can't control his own eyes, eh? Damn weeping jelly. Sometimes I think I should just have it out and make do with a patch. Gisale's stomach roiled. How long has it been, West? 7 years? 8? A muscle was working on the side of the Major's head. 9. Imagine that. 9 years. Can you believe it? It seems like only yesterday. It was on the ridge, wasn't it, where we parted? On the ridge, yes. Don't worry, West. I don't blame you in the least. Glockter slapped the Major warmly on the arm. Not for that, anyway. You tried to talk me out of it, I remember. I had time enough to think about it in Gurkel, after all. Lots of time to think. You were always a good friend to me. And now, young Colum West, a major in the King's Own. Imagine that. Giselle had not the slightest idea what they were talking about. He wanted only to be sick, then go to bed. Inquisitor Glockter turned toward him with a smile, displaying once again the hideous gap in his teeth. And this must be Captain Luthar, for whom everyone has such high hopes in the coming contest. Marshal Varuz is a hard master, is he not? He waved his cane weakly at Giselle. Jab, jab, eh, Captain? Jab, jab. Giselle felt his bile rising. He coughed and looked down at his feet, willing the world to remain motionless. The Inquisitor looked around expectantly at each of them in turn. West looked pale, Jallenhorn mud-stained and sulky. Caspar was still sitting in the road. None of them had anything to say. Glockter cleared his throat. Well, duty calls. He bowed stiffly. But I hope to see you all again, very soon. Giselle found himself hoping he never saw the man again. Perhaps we might fence again sometime, muttered Major West. Glockter gave a good-natured laugh. Oh, I would enjoy that, West. But I find that I'm ever so slightly crippled these days. If you're after a fight, I'm sure that Practical Frost could oblige you. He looked over at Jallenhorn. But I must warn you, he doesn't fight like a gentleman. I wish you all a pleasant evening. He placed his hat back on his head, then turned slowly and shuffled off down the dingy street. The 3 officers watched him limp away in an interminable, awkward silence. Caspar finally stumbled over. What was all that about? He asked. Nothing, said West through gritted teeth. Lest we forget it ever happened. Chapter 5. Teeth and Fingers. Time is short. We must work quickly. Glockter nodded to Severard, and he smiled and pulled the bag off Sept and Teufel's head. The master of the mints was a strong, noble-looking man. His face was already starting to bruise.
What is the meaning of this?
He roared, all bluster and bravado.
Do you know who I am?
Glockter snorted. Of course we know who you are. Do you think we're in the habit of snatching people from the streets at random?
I am the master of the royal mints,
yelled the prisoner, struggling at his bonds. Practical Frost looked on impassively, arms folded. The irons were already glowing orange in the brazier.
How dare you! We cannot have these constant interruptions,
shouted Glockter. Frost kicked Teufel savagely in the shin, and he yelped with pain.
How can our prisoner sign his paper of confession if his hands are tied? Please release him.
Teufel stared suspiciously around as the albino untied his wrists. Then he saw the cleaver. The polished blade shone mirror-bright in the harsh lamplight. Truly a thing of beauty. You'd like to have that, wouldn't you, Teufel? I bet you'd like to cut my head off with it. Glockter almost hoped that he would. His right hand seemed to be reaching for it, but he used it to shove the paper of confession away instead. Ah, said Glockter, the master of the mints is a right-handed gentleman. A right-handed gentleman, Severard hissed in the prisoner's ear. Teufel was staring across the table through narrowed eyes.
I know you. Glockter, isn't it? The one who was captured in Gurgle, the one they tortured? Sanden Glockter, am I right? Well, you're in over your head this time, I can tell you. Right in over your head. When High Justice Marovia hears about this...
Glockter sprang to his feet, his chair screeching on the tiles. His left leg was agony, but he ignored it.
Look at this,
he hissed, then opened his mouth wide, giving the horrified prisoner a good look at his teeth. Or what's left of them.
You see that? You see? Where they cracked out the teeth above, they left them below. And where they took them out below, they left them above, all the way to the back. See?
Glockter pulled his cheeks back with his fingers so Teufel could get a better view.
They did it with a tiny chisel, a little bit each day. It took months.
Glockter sat down stiffly, then smiled wide.
What excellent work, eh? The irony of it, to leave you half your teeth, but not a one of them any use. I have soup most days.
The master of the mint swallowed hard. Glockter could see a drop of sweat running down his neck.
And the teeth were just the beginning. I have to piss sitting down like a woman, you know. I'm 35 years old, and I need help getting out of bed.
He leaned back again and stretched out his leg with a wince.
Every day is its own little hell for me. Every day. So tell me, can you seriously believe that anything you might say could scare me?
Glockter studied his prisoner, taking his time.
No longer half so sure of himself. Confess, he whispered. Then we can ship you off to Angland and still get some sleep tonight.
Teufel's face had turned almost as pale as Practical Frost's, but he said nothing. The Arch-Lector will be here soon, already on his way, most likely. If there is no confession when he arrives, we'll all be off to Angland.
What news?
At best. Glockter took hold of his cane and got to his feet.
I like to think of myself as an artist, but artistry takes time, and we have wasted half the evening searching for you in every brothel in the city. Thankfully,
Practical Frost hath a keen nose and an excellent sense of direction. He can sniff out a rat in a shithouse. A rat in a shithouse, echoed Severard, eyes glittering bright in the orange glow from the brazier. We are on a tight schedule, so let me be blunt. You will confess to me within 10 minutes. Teufel snorted and folded his arms. Never! Hold him. Frost seized the prisoner from behind and folded him in a vice-like grip, pinning his right arm to his side. Severard grabbed hold of his left wrist and spread his fingers out on the scarred tabletop. Glocta curled his fist round the smooth grip of the cleaver, the blade scraping against the wood as he pulled it slowly towards him. He stared down at Teufel's hand. What beautiful fingernails he has. How long and glossy. You cannot work down a mine with nails like that. Glocta raised the cleaver high. Wait! Screamed the prisoner. Bang! The heavy blade bit deep into the tabletop, neatly paring off Teufel's middle fingernail. He was breathing fast now, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Now we'll see what kind of a man you really are. I think you can see where this is going, said Glocta. You know, they did it to a corporal who was captured with me, 1 cut a day. He was a tough man, very tough. They made it past his elbow before he died. Glocta lifted the cleaver again. Confess. You couldn't. Bang. The cleaver took off the very tip of Teufel's middle finger. Blood bubbled out onto the tabletop. Severard's eyes were smiling in the lamplight. Teufel's jaw dropped. But the pain will be a while coming. Confess! Bellowed Glocta. Bang! The cleaver took off the top of Teufel's ring finger and a little disc out of his middle finger, which rolled a short way and dropped off onto the floor. Frost's face was carved from marble. Confess! Bang! The tip of Teufel's index finger jumped in the air. His middle finger was down to the first joint. Glocta paused, wiping the sweat from his forehead on the back of his hand. His leg was throbbing with the exertion. Blood was dripping onto the tiles with a steady tap, tap, tap. Teufel was staring wide-eyed at his shortened fingers. Severard shook his head. That's excellent work, Inquisitor. He flicked one of the discs of flesh across the table. The precision, I'm in awe. Ah! Screamed the master of the mints. Now it dawned on him. Glocta raised the cleaver once again. I will confess! Shrieked Teufel. I will confess! Excellent, said Glocta brightly. Excellent, said Severard. Said Practical Frost. Chapter 6. The Wide and Barren North. The Magi are an ancient and mysterious order, learned in the secrets of the world, practiced in the ways of magic, wise and powerful beyond the dreams of men. That was the rumor. Such a one should have ways of finding a man, even a man alone in the wide and barren north. If that was so, then he was taking his time about it. Logan scratched at his tangled beard and wondered what was keeping the Great One. Perhaps he was lost. He asked himself again if he should have stayed in the forests, where food at least was plentiful. But to the south, the spirits had said, and if you went south from the hills, you came to these withered moors. So here he had waited in the briars and the mud, in bad weather, and mostly gone hungry. His boots were worn out anyway, so he had to set his miserable camp not far from the road, the better to see this wizard coming. Since the wars, the north was full of dangerous scum. Deserting warriors turned bandit, peasants fled from their burned-out land, leaderless and desperate men with nothing left to lose, and so on. Logan wasn't worried, though. No one had a reason to come to this arsehole of the world. No one but him and the magus. So he sat and waited, looked for food, didn't find any, sat and waited some more. At this time of year, the moors were often soaked by sudden downpours, but he would have smoky, thorny little fires by night, if he could, to keep his flagging spirits up and attract any passing wizards. It had been raining this evening, but it had stopped a while before, and it was dry enough for a fire. Now he had his pot over it, cooking a stew with the last of the meat he had brought with him from the forest. He would have to move on in the morning and look for food. The magus could catch up with him later if he still cared. He was stirring his meager meal and wondering whether to go back north or move on south tomorrow, when he heard the sound of hooves on the road. One horse moving slowly. He sat back on his coat and waited. There was a neigh, the jingle of a harness. A rider came over the rise. With the watery sun low on the horizon behind, Logan couldn't see him clearly, but he sat stiff and awkward in his saddle like a man not used to the road. He urged his horse gently in the direction of the fire and reined in a few yards away. "Good evening," he said. He was not in the least what Logan had been expecting. A gaunt, pale, sickly-looking young man with dark rings round his eyes, long hair plastered to his head by the drizzle, and a nervous smile. He seemed more wet than wise, and certainly didn't look powerful beyond the dreams of men. He looked mostly hungry, cold, and ill. He looked something like Logan felt, in fact. "Shouldn't you have a staff?" The young man looked surprised. That is to say, I'm not a magus." He trailed off and licked his lips nervously. "The spirits told me to expect a magus, but they're often wrong." "Oh, well, I'm an apprentice, but my master, the great Bias," and he bowed his head reverently, "is none other than the first of the Magi, great in high art and learned in deep wisdom. He sent me to find you." He looked suddenly doubtful. "And bring you? You are Logan Ninefingers?" Logan held up his left hand and looked at the pale young man through the gap where his middle finger used to be. "Oh, good." The apprentice breathed a sigh of relief, then suddenly stopped himself. "Oh, that is to say, sorry about the finger." Logan laughed. It was the first time since he dragged himself out of the river. It wasn't very funny, but he laughed loud. It felt good. The young man smiled and slipped painfully from the saddle. "I am Malachus Quai." "Malachus what?" "Quai," he said, making for the fire. "What kind of a name is that?" "I am from the old empire." Logan had never heard of any such place. An empire, eh? Well, it was once. Mightiest nation in the circle of the world. The young man squatted down stiffly by the fire. "But the glory of the past is long faded. It's not much more than a huge battlefield now." Logan nodded. He knew well enough what one of those looked like. "It's far away, in the west of the world." The apprentice waved his hand vaguely. Logan laughed again. "That's east." Quai smiled sadly. "I am a seer, though not, it seems, a very good one. Master Bias sent me to find you, but the stars have not been auspicious, and I became lost in the bad weather." He pushed his hair out of his eyes and spread his hands. "I had a pack horse with food and supplies, and another horse for you, but I lost them in a storm. I fear I am no outdoorsman." "Seems not." Quai took a flask from his pocket and leaned across with it. Logan took it from him, opened it, took a swig. The hot liquor ran down his throat, warmed him to the roots of his hair. "Well, Malachus Quai, you lost your food, but you kept hold of what really mattered. It takes an effort to make me smile these days. You're right welcome at my fire." "Thank you." The apprentice paused and held his palms out to the meager flames. "I haven't eaten for 2 days." He shook his head, hair flapping back and forth. "It has been A difficult time. He licked his lips and looked at the pot. Logan passed him the spoon. Malachus Quai stared at it with big round eyes. Have you eaten? Logan nodded. He hadn't, but the wretched apprentice looked famished, and there was barely enough for one. He took another swig from the flask. That would do for him for now. Quai attacked the stew with relish. When it was done, he scraped the pot out, licked the spoon, then licked the edge of the pot for good measure. He sat back against a big rock. I am forever in your debt, Logan Ninefingers. You saved my life. I hardly dared hope you'd be so gracious a host. You're not quite what I expected either, being honest. Logan pulled at the flask again and licked his lips. Who is this Bias? The first of the Magi, great in high art and learned in deep wisdom. I fear he would be most seriously displeased with me. He's to be feared, then? Well, replied the apprentice weakly, he does have a bit of a temper. Logan took another swallow. The warmth was spreading through his body now, the first time he had felt warm in weeks. There was a pause. What does he want from me, Quai? There was no reply. The soft sound of snoring came from across the fire. Logan smiled, and wrapping himself in his coat, lay down to sleep as well. The apprentice woke with a sudden fit of coughing. It was early morning, and the dingy world was thick with mist. It was probably better that way. There was nothing to see but miles of mud, rock, and miserable brown gorse. Everything was coated in cold dew, but Logan had managed to get a sad tongue of fire going. Quai's hair was plastered to his pallid face. He rolled onto his side and coughed phlegm onto the ground. Ugh! He croaked. He coughed and spat again. Logan secured the last of his meager gear on the unhappy horse. Morning, he said, looking up at the white sky. Though not a good one. I will die. I will die, and then I will not have to move. We've got no food, so if we stay here, you will die. Then I can eat you and go back over the mountains. The apprentice smiled weakly. What do we do? What indeed? Where do we find this Bias? At the Great Northern Library. Logan had never heard of it, but then he'd never been that interested in books. Which is where? It's south of here, about 4 days' ride, beside a great lake. You know the way? The apprentice tottered to his feet and stood, swaying slightly, breathing fast and shallow. He was ghostly pale, and his face had a sheen of sweat. I think so, he muttered, but he hardly looked certain. Neither Quai nor his horse would make 4 days without food, even providing they didn't get lost. Food had to be the first thing. To follow the road through the woods to the south was the best option, despite the greater risk. They might get killed by bandits, but the forage would be better, and the hunger would likely kill them otherwise. You'd better ride, said Logan. I lost the horses. I should be the one to walk. Logan put his hand on Quai's forehead. It was hot and clammy. You've a fever. You'd better ride. The apprentice didn't try to argue. He looked down at Logan's ragged boots. Can you take my boots? Logan shook his head. Too small. He knelt down over the smouldering remains of the fire and pursed his lips. What are you doing? Fires have spirits. I will keep this one under my tongue, and we can use it to light another fire later. Quai looked too ill to be surprised. Logan sucked up the spirit, coughed on the smoke, shuddered at the bitter taste. You ready to leave? The apprentice raised his arms in a hopeless gesture. I am packed. Malachus Quai loved to talk. He talked as they made their way south across the moors, as the sun climbed into the grimy skies, as they entered the woods toward evening time. His illness did nothing to stop his chatter, but Logan didn't mind. It was a long time since anyone had talked to him. and it helped to take his mind off his feet. He was starving and tired, but it was his feet that were the problem. His boots were tatters of old leather, his toes cut and battered, his calf was still burning from the shanker's teeth. Every step was an ordeal. Once, they had called him the most feared man in the north. Now he was afraid of the smallest sticks and stones in the road. There was a joke in there somewhere. He winced as his foot hit a pebble. So I spent 7 years studying with Master Zacharias. He is great among the Magi, the 5th of Juven's 12 apprentices, a great man. Everything connected with the Magi seemed to be great in Quai's eyes. He felt I was ready to come to the Great Northern Library and study with Master Baez to earn my staff. But things have not been easy for me here. Master Baez is most demanding and... The horse stopped and snorted, shied and took a hesitant step back. Logan sniffed the air and frowned. There were men nearby, and badly washed ones. He should have noticed it sooner, but his attention had been on his feet. Quai looked down at him. "What is it?" As if in answer, a man stepped out from behind a tree perhaps 10 strides ahead, another a little further down the road. They were scum, without a doubt. Dirty, bearded, dressed in ragged bits of mismatched fur and leather. Not, on the whole, unlike Logan. The skinny one on the left had a spear with a barbed head. The big one on the right had a heavy sword speckled with rust and an old dented helmet with a spike on top. They moved forward, grinning. There was a sound behind, and Logan looked over his shoulder, his heart sinking. A third man, with a big boil on his face, was making his way cautiously down the road toward them, a heavy wood axe in his hands. Quai leaned down from his saddle, eyes wide with fear. "Are they bandits?" "You're the fucking seer," hissed Logan through gritted teeth. They stopped a stride or two in front. The one with the helmet seemed to be in charge. "Nice horse," he growled. "Would you lend it to us?" The one with the spear grinned as he took hold of the bridle. Things had taken a turn for the worse, all right. A moment ago, that had hardly seemed possible, but fate had found a way. Logan doubted that Quai would be much use in a fight. That left him alone against 3 or more, and with only a knife. If he did nothing, him and Malicus would end up robbed and more than likely killed. You have to be realistic about these things. He looked the 3 bandits over again. They didn't expect a fight, not from 2 unarmed men. The spear was sideways on, the sword pointed at the ground. He didn't know about the axe, so he'd have to trust to luck with that one. It's a sorry fact that the man who strikes first usually strikes last. So Logan turned to the one with the helmet and spat the spirit in his face. It ignited in the air and pounced on him hungrily. His head burst into spitting flames, the sword clattered to the ground. He clawed desperately at his face, and his arms caught fire as well. He reeled screaming away. Quai's horse startled at the flames and reared up, snorting. The skinny man stumbled back with a gasp, and Logan leapt red, and he staggered away with blood streaming down his chin. Logan jerked him back with the spear, swung his right arm round in a wide arc, and punched him in the neck. He went down, rolling away to his left. The axe whistled through the air above his head and cut a long slash in the horse's side, spattering drops of blood across the ground and ripping the buckle on the saddle girth open. Boilface tottered away, spinning around after his axe. Logan sprang at him, but his ankle twisted on a stone and he tottered like a drunkard, yelping at the pain. An arrow hummed past his face from somewhere in the trees behind and was lost in the bushes on the other side of the road. The horse snorted and kicked, eyes rolling madly, then took off down the road at a crazy gallop. Malicus Quai wailed as the saddle slid off its back and he was flung into the bushes. There was no time to think about him. Logan charged at the axeman with a roar, aiming the spear at his heart. He brought his axe up in time to nudge the point away, but not far enough. The spear spitted him through the shoulder, spun him round. There was a sharp crack as the shaft snapped. Logan lost his balance and pitched forward, bearing Boilface down into the road. The spear point sticking out of his back cut a deep gash into Logan's scalp as he fell on top of him. Logan seized hold of the Axeman's matted hair with both hands, pulled his head back, and mashed his face into a rock. He lurched to his feet, head spinning, wiping blood out of his eyes, just in time to see an arrow zip out of the trees and thud into a trunk a stride or two away. Logan hurtled at the archer. He saw him now, a boy no more than 14, reaching for another arrow. Logan pulled out his knife. The boy was knocking the arrow to his bow, but his eyes were wide with panic. He fumbled the string and drove the arrow through his hand, looking greatly surprised. Logan was on it. The boy swung the bow at him, but he ducked below it and jumped forward, driving the knife up with both hands. The blade caught the boy under the chin and lifted him into the air, then snapped off in his neck. He dropped on top of Logan, the jagged shard of the knife cutting a long gash in his arm. Blood splattered everywhere, from the cut on Logan's head, from the cut on Logan's arm, from the gaping wound in the boy's throat. He shoved the corpse away, staggered against a tree, and gasped for breath. His heart was pounding, the blood roaring in his ears, his stomach turning over. "I am still alive," he whispered. "I am still alive." The cuts on his head and his arm were starting to throb. 2 more scars. It could have been a lot worse. He scraped the blood from his eyes and limped back to the road. Malachus Quai was standing, staring ashen-faced at the 3 corpses. Logan took him by the shoulders, looked him up and down. "You hurt?" Quai only stared at the bodies. "Are they dead?" The corpse of the big one with the helmet was still smoking, making a disgustingly appetizing smell. He had a good pair of boots on, Logan noticed, a lot better than his own. The one with the boil had his neck turned too far around to be alive, that, and he had the broken spear through it. Logan rolled the skinny one over with his foot. He still had a look of surprise on his bloody face, eyes staring up at the sky, mouth open. "Must have crushed his windpipe," muttered Logan. His hands were covered in blood. He grabbed one with the other to stop them from trembling. "What about the one in the trees?" Logan nodded. "What happened to the horse?" "Gone," muttered Quai hopelessly. "See if they've got any food." Logan pointed to the smoking corpse. "And you help me get his boots off." Chapter 7. Fencing practice. "Press him, Jezal, press him! Don't be shy!" Jezal was only too willing to oblige. He sprang forward, lunging with his right. West was already off balance, and he stumbled back, all out of form, only just managing to parry with his short steel. They were using half-edged blades today to add a little danger to the proceedings. You couldn't really stab a man with one, but you could give him a painful scratch or two if you tried hard enough. Jezal intended to give the Major a scratch for yesterday's humiliation. "That's it! Give him hell! Jab, jab, Captain! Jab, jab!" West made a clumsy cut, but Jezal saw it coming and swatted the steel aside, still pressing forward, jabbing for all he was worth. He slashed with the left, and again. West blocked desperately, staggered back against the wall. Jezal had him at last. He cackled with glee as he lunged forward again with the long steel, but his opponent had come suddenly and surprisingly alive. West slipped away, shoved the lunge aside with disappointing firmness. Jezal stumbled forward off balance, gave a shocked gasp as the point of his sword found a gap between 2 stones, and his steel was wrenched out of his numb hand, lodged there, wobbling in the wall. West darted forward, ducked inside Jezal's remaining blade, and slammed into him with his shoulder. "Ooh!" said Jezal as he staggered back and crashed to the floor, fumbling his short steel. It skittered across the stones, and Lord Marshal Varuz caught it smartly under his foot. The blunted point of West's sword hovered over Jezal's throat. "Damn it!" he cursed, as the grinning Major offered him his hand. "Yes," murmured Varuz with a deep sigh. Damn it indeed. An even more detestable performance than yesterday's, if that's possible. You let Major West make a fool of you again. Giselle slapped West's hand away with a scowl and got to his feet. Never once lost control of that mount. Allowed yourself to be drawn in and then disarmed. Disarmed! My grandson would not have made that mistake, and he is 8 years old. Baruz whacked at the floor with his stick. Explain to me, please, Captain Luthar, how you will win a fencing match from a prone position and without your steels. Giselle sulked and rubbed the back of his head. No? In future, if you fall off a cliff carrying your steels, I want to see you smashed to bits at the bottom, gripping them tightly in your dead fingers. Do you hear me? Yes, Marshal Varus, mumbled a sullen Giselle, wishing the old bastard would take a tumble off a cliff himself. Or perhaps the Tower of Chains. That would be adequate. Maybe Major West could join him. Overconfidence is a curse to the swordsman. You must treat every opponent as though he will be your last. As for your footwork, and Baruz curled his lip with disgust. Fine and fancy coming forward, but put you on the back foot and you quite wither away. Major only had to tap you, and you fell down like a fainting schoolgirl. West grinned across at him. He was loving this. Absolutely loving it. They say Bremadan Gorst has a back leg like a pillar of steel. A pillar of steel, they say. It would be easier to knock down the house of the Maker than him. The Lord Marshal pointed over at the outline of the huge tower looming up over the buildings of the courtyard. The House of the Maker! The floor with his boot. For the 100th time, he entertained the notion of giving it up and never holding a steel again. But what would people say? His father was absurdly proud of him, always boasting about his skill to anyone who would listen. He had his heart set on seeing his son fight in the square of marshals before a screaming crowd. If Giselle threw it over now, his father would be mortified, and he could say goodbye to his commission, goodbye to his allowance, goodbye to his ambitions. No doubt his brothers would love that. Balance is the key, Baruz was spouting. Your strength rises up through the legs. From now on, we will add an hour on the beam to your training, every day. Giselle winced. So, Iran, exercises with the heavy bar, forms, an hour of sparring, forms again, an hour on the beam. The Lord Marshal nodded with satisfaction. That will suffice for now. I will see you at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, ice-cold sober. Baruz frowned. Ice-cold sober. I can't do this forever, you know, said Giselle as he hobbled stiffly back towards his quarters. How much of this horrible shit should a man have to take? West grinned. This is nothing. I've never seen the old bastard so soft on anyone. He must really like you. He wasn't half so friendly with me. Giselle wasn't sure he believed it. Worse than this? I didn't have the grounding that you've had. He made me hold the heavy bar over my head all afternoon until it fell on me. The Major winced slightly, as though even the memory was painful. He made me run up and down the Tower of Chains in full armor. He had me sparring 4 hours a day, every day. How did you put up with it? I didn't have a choice. I'm not a nobleman. Fencing was the only way for me to get noticed. But it paid off in the end. How many commoners do you know with a commission in the King's Own? Giselle shrugged. Come to think of it, very few. As a nobleman himself, he didn't think there should be any. But you're from a good family, and a captain already. If you can win the contest, there's no telling how far you could go. Hoff, the Lord Chamberlain, Morovia, the High Justice, Varuz himself for that matter, they were all champions in their day. Champions with the right blood always go on to great things. Giselle snorted. Like your friend Sandan Glokta? The name dropped between them like a stone. Well, almost always. Major West! came a rough voice from behind. A thick-set sergeant with a scar down his cheek was hurrying over to them. "Sergeant Forrest, how are you?" asked West, clapping the soldier warmly on the back. He had a touch with peasants, but then Giselle had to keep reminding himself that West was little better than a peasant himself. He might be educated and an officer and so forth, but he still had more in common with the sergeant than he did with Giselle, once you thought about it. The sergeant beamed. "Very well, thank you, sir." He nodded respectfully to Giselle. "Morning, Captain." Giselle favoured him with a terse nod and turned away to look up the avenue. He could think of no possible reason why an officer would want to be familiar with the common soldiers. Furthermore, he was scarred and ugly. Giselle had no use whatever for ugly people. "What can I do for you?" West was asking. "Marshal Burr wishes to see you, sir, for an urgent briefing. All senior officers are ordered to attend." West's face clouded. "I'll be there as soon as I can." The sergeant saluted and strode off. "What's all that about?" asked Giselle carelessly, watching some clerk chase around after a paper he had dropped. "Angland. This king of the Northmen, Bethod."
You seek the dwarves?
West said the name with a scowl, as though it left a bitter taste. "They say he's defeated all his enemies in the north, and now he's spoiling for a fight with the Union." "Well, if it's a fight he wants," said Giselle airily. Wars were a fine thing, in his opinion, an excellent opportunity for glory and advancement. The paper fluttered past his boot on the light breeze, closely followed by the puffing clerk. Giselle grinned at him as he hurried past, bent almost double in his clumsy efforts to try and grab it. The Major snatched up the grubby document and handed it over. "Thank you, sir," said the clerk, his sweaty face quite pitiful with gratitude. "Thank you so much." "Think nothing of it," murmured West, and the clerk gave a sycophantic little bow and hurried away. Giselle was disappointed. He'd been rather enjoying the chase. "There could be war, but that's the least of my troubles right now."
What news of the war?
West breathed a heavy sigh. "My sister is in Adua." "I didn't know you had a sister." "Well, I do, and she's here." "So?" Giselle had little enthusiasm for hearing about the Major's sister. West might have pulled himself up, but the rest of his family were distinctly beneath Giselle's notice. He was interested in meeting poor common girls he could take advantage of, and rich noble ones he might think about marrying. Anything in between was of no importance. "Well, my sister can be charming, but she is also a little unconventional. She can be something of a handful in the wrong mood. Truth be told, I'd prefer to take care of a pack of Northmen than her." "Come now, West," said Giselle absently, hardly taking any notice of what he was saying. "I'm sure she can't be that difficult." The Major brightened. "Well, I'm relieved to hear you say that. She's always been keen to see the Agriont for herself, and I've been saying for years that I'd give her a tour if ever she came here. We'd arranged it for today, in fact." Giselle had a sinking feeling. "Now, with this meeting—" "But I have so little time these days," whinged Giselle. "I promise I'll make it up to you. We'll meet you at my quarters in an hour." "Hold on!" But West was already striding away. "Don't let her be too ugly," Giselle was thinking as he slowly approached the door to Major West's quarters and raised his unwilling fist to knock. "Just don't let her be too ugly. And not too stupid either. Anything but an afternoon wasted on a stupid girl." His hand was halfway to the door when he became aware of raised voices on the other side. He stood guiltily in the corridor, his ear drawing closer and closer to the wood, hoping to hear something complimentary about himself. "And what about your maid?" came Major West's muffled voice, sounding greatly annoyed. "I had to leave her at the house. There was a lot to do. Nobody's been there in months." West's sister. Giselle's heart sank. A deep voice, she sounded like a fat one. Giselle couldn't afford to be seen walking about the Agriont with a fat girl on his arm. It could ruin his reputation. But you can't just wander about the city on your own. I got here all right, didn't I? You're forgetting who we are, Colum. I can make do without a servant. To most of the people here, I'm no better than a servant anyway. Besides, I'll have your friend Captain Luthar to look after me. That's even worse, as you damn well know. Well, I wasn't to know that you'd be busy. I would have thought you'd make the time to see your own sister. She didn't sound an idiot, which was something, but fat and now peevish too. Aren't I safe with your friend? He's a good enough sort, but is he safe with you? Giselle wasn't sure what the Major meant by that little comment. I'm walking about the Agriont alone, and with a man you hardly know. Don't play the fool. I know you better than that. What will people think? Shit on what they think. Giselle jerked away from the door.
Why are you here?
He wasn't used to hearing ladies use that sort of language. Fat, peevish, and coarse, damn it. This might be even worse than he feared. He looked up the corridor, considering making a run for it, already working out his excuse. Curse his bad luck, though. Someone was coming up the stairs now. He couldn't leave without being seen. He would just have to knock and get it over with. He gritted his teeth and pounded resentfully at the door.
Who goes there?
The voices stopped suddenly, and Giselle put on an unconvincing, friendly grin. Let the torture begin. The door swung open. For some reason, he had been expecting a kind of shorter, fatter version of Major West in a dress. He had been greatly mistaken. She was perhaps slightly fuller of figure than was strictly fashionable, since skinny girls were all the rage, but you couldn't call her fat. Not fat at all. She had dark hair, dark skin, a little darker than would generally be thought ideal. He knew that a lady should remain out of the sun whenever possible, but looking at her, he really couldn't remember why. Her eyes were very dark, almost black, and blue eyes were turning the heads this season, but hers shone in the dim light of the doorway in a rather bewitching manner. She smiled at him, a strange sort of smile, higher on one side than the other. It gave him a slightly uneasy feeling, as though she knew something funny that he didn't. Still, excellent teeth, all white and shiny. Giselle's anger was swiftly vanishing. The longer he looked at her, the more her looks grew on him, and the emptier his head became of cogent thought. "Hello,"
Why are you here?
she said. His mouth opened slightly, as if by force of habit, but nothing came out. His mind was a blank page. "And you must be Captain Luthar." I'm Colum's sister, Adi." She slapped her forehead. "I'm such an idiot, though. Colum will have told you all about me. I know the two of you are great friends." Giselle glanced awkwardly at the Major, who was frowning back at him and looking somewhat put out. It would hardly do to say he had been entirely unaware of her existence until that morning. He struggled to frame even a mildly amusing reply, but nothing came to mind. Adi took hold of him by the elbow and drew him into the room, talking all the while. "I know you're a great fencer, but I've been told your wit is even sharper than your sword. So much so, in fact, that you only use your sword upon your friends, as your wit is far too deadly." She looked at him expectantly. Silence. "Well," he mumbled, "I do fence a bit." Pathetic, utterly awful. "Is this the right man, or do I have the gardener here?" She looked him over with a strange expression, hard to read. Perhaps it was the same sort of look Giselle would have while examining a horse he was thinking of buying. Cautious, searching, intent, and ever so slightly disdainful. Even the gardeners have splendid uniforms, it seems. Giselle was almost sure that had been some kind of insult, but he was too busy trying to think of something witty to pay it too much mind. He knew he would have to speak now or spend the entire day in embarrassed silence, so he opened his mouth and trusted to luck. "I'm sorry if I seem dumbfounded, but Major West is such an unattractive man. How could I have expected so beautiful a sister?" West snorted with laughter. His sister raised an eyebrow and counted the points off on her fingers. Mildly offensive to my brother, which is good. Somewhat amusing, which is also good. Honest, which is refreshing. And wildly complimentary to me, which, of course, is excellent. A little late, but on the whole worth waiting for. She looked Giselle in the eye. The afternoon might not be a total loss. Giselle wasn't sure he liked that last comment, and he wasn't sure he liked the way she looked at him, but he was enjoying looking at her, so he was prepared to forgive a lot. The women of his acquaintance rarely said anything clever, especially the fine-looking ones. He supposed they were trained to smile and nod and listen while the men did the talking. On the whole, he agreed with that way of doing things, but the cleverness sat well on West's sister, and she had more than caught his curiosity. Fat and peevish were off the menu. Of that there could be no doubt. As for coarse, well, handsome people are never coarse, are they? Just unconventional. He was beginning to think that the afternoon, as she had said, might not be a total loss. West made for the door. "It seems I must leave you two to make fools of one another. Lord Marshal Burr is expecting me. Don't do anything I wouldn't, eh?" The comment seemed to be aimed at Giselle, but West was looking at his sister. "You seem to allow virtually everything," she said, catching Giselle's eye. He was amazed to feel himself blushing like a little girl, and he coughed and looked down at his shoes. West rolled his eyes. "Mercy," he said, as the door clicked shut. "Would you care for a drink?" Hardy asked, already pouring wine into a glass. Alone with a beautiful young woman. Hardly a new experience, Giselle told himself, and yet he seemed to be lacking his usual confidence. "Yes, thank you. Most kind. Yes, a drink, just the thing to steady the nerves." She held the glass out to him and poured another for herself. He wondered if a young lady should be drinking at this time of day, but it seemed pointless to say anything. She wasn't his sister, after all. "Tell me, Captain, how do you know my brother?" "Well, he's my commanding officer, and we fenced together." His brain was beginning to function again. "But then, you know that already." She grinned at him. "Of course, but my governess always maintained that young men should be allowed their share of the conversation." Giselle gave an ungainly cough as he was swallowing and spilled some wine down his jacket. "Oh, dear," he said. "Here, take this a moment." She gave him her glass, and he took it without thinking, but then found himself without a free hand. When she started dabbing at his chest with a white handkerchief, he could hardly object, though it did seem rather forward. Being honest, he might have objected if she wasn't so damn fine-looking. He wondered if she realized what an excellent view she was giving him down the front of her dress, but of course not. How could she? She was simply new here, unused to courtly manners, the artless ways of a country girl, and so forth. Nice view, though. There was no denying that. "There, that's better," she said, though the dabbing had made no apparent difference. Not to his uniform, anyway. She took the glasses from him, drained her own quickly with a practised flick of her head, and shoved them on the table. "Shall we go?" "Yes, of course." "Oh," and he offered her his arm. She led him out into the corridor and down the stairs, chatting freely. It was a flurry of conversational blows, and, as Marshal Varouz had pointed out earlier, his defence was weak. He parried desperately as they made their way across the wide square of marshals, but he could barely get a word in. It seemed as though it was Ardi who had been living there for years, and Giselle who was the bumpkin from the provinces. "The Halls Marshal are behind there." She nodded over at the looming wall that separated the headquarters of the Union's armies from the rest of the Agrion. "Indeed they are. That is where the Lord Marshals have their offices and so forth. And there are barracks there, and armories, and, He trailed off. He could not think of much else to say, but Ardy came to his rescue. So, my brother must be somewhere in there. He's quite the famous soldier, I suppose. First through the breach at Ulriach and so on. Well, yes, Major West is very well respected here. He could be such a bore, though, can't he? He does so love to be mysterious and troubled. She put on a faint, faraway smile and rubbed her chin thoughtfully, just as her brother might have done. She had captured the man perfectly, and Giselle had to laugh, but he was starting to wonder if she should be walking quite so close beside him, holding his arm in quite so intimate a way. Not that he objected, of course. Quite the reverse, but people were looking. Ardy, he said. So this must be the Kingsway. Yes, Ardy. She was gazing up at the magnificent statue of Harrod the Great, his stern eyes fixed on the middle distance. Harrod the Great? She asked. Yes. In the Dark Ages, before there was a union, he fought to bring the three kingdoms together. He was the first High King. You idiot, thought Giselle. She knows that already. Everyone does. Ardy, I think your brother would not... And this is Bias, the first of the Magi? Yes, he was Harod's most trusted advisor. Ardy, is it true they still keep a vacant seat for him in the closed council? Giselle was taken aback. I'd heard that there's an empty chair there, but I didn't know that. They all look so serious, don't they? I suppose those were serious times, he said, grinning lamely. A night herald thundered down the avenue on a huge, well-lathered horse, the sun glinting on the golden wings of his helmet. Secretaries scattered to let him pass, and Giselle tried to guide Ardy gently out of the way. To his great dismay, she refused to be moved. The horse flashed past within a few inches of her, close enough for the wind to flick her hair in Giselle's face. She turned to him with a flush of excitement on her cheek, otherwise utterly undaunted by her brush with severe injury. "A Night Herald?" she asked, taking Giselle's arm once again and leading him off down the Kingsway. "Yes," squeaked Giselle, desperately trying to bring his voice under control. "The Knights Herald are entrusted with a grave responsibility. They carry messages from the king to every part of the Union." His heart had stopped hammering. "Even across the Circle Sea to Angland, to Goscar and Westport. They're entrusted to speak with the king's voice, and so forbidden from speaking except on the king's business. Fedor Dan Harden was on the boat on our way over. He's a Knight Herald. We talked for hours.